Your seats. I'd just like to introduce to you Ed Steinfeld, who is the director of the Watson Institute, and it's largely thanks to him that all of us are here. And he would like to just say a couple of words of welcome. Please, Ed.
Thanks so much, Omer. It's not thanks to me that you're all here, although I appreciate your saying that, Omer. It's a privilege. It's my privilege, but it's certainly the privilege of the Watson Institute to host this workshop, to host the previous workshops related, to welcome many of you back to the Watson Institute. So in essence, it's my thanks to you all for enriching our community with this kind of discussion, with this kind of scholarship. And I'll also just say, I'm so sorry that my administrative duties kept me away from the earlier parts of this conference today, but if you'll allow me, I'll join you at least for this last part and share just the fantastic intellectual work that's going on here. Thank you all.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. After a very stormy session, we're on to another stormy session, I'm sure. I don't want to start saying what I think because it's wasting time here. And I already know that we're going to be short on time. So this is the Confronting the Past, Preparing the Future session. And we have three speakers. And I would like to start with, first of all, warning everyone that the direct orders of Omer are to give maximum half an hour to each. And I will be very firm about it. And so our first speaker is Eran Tzidkiyahu. Eran is a native Jerusalemite, as he likes to present himself, and as he presented himself several times here today, a geopolitical guide and researcher who focuses on Jerusalem, holy sites and religious nationality in religious nationalism in Israel and Palestine. Other than being a guide, he is also a PhD candidate at the Paris Institute of Political Sciences and studies Muslim relations, Muslim Palestinian and Jewish Israeli religious nationalism in comparative approach. And Eran will be speaking about One Jerusalem, past, present, and future. Please, Eran.
Thank you. Can you hear me like this? No? Okay. Is it better? Okay. So first of all, thank you very much, Abigail. To talk here now about the political future of Jerusalem, I had to cross the ocean from Jerusalem just to find out that tomorrow in Al-Quds University there is a conference about Jerusalem and the future. All I had to do there is to cross road number 1 to Sheikh Jarrah, to Hind al-Husseini College of Al-Quds University, and to listen to a wide variety of speakers from the Palestinian intellectual sphere talking about the different aspects of Jerusalem's political future, which is quite interesting. And also is part of the change that is occurring in Jerusalem. I think it wouldn't have happened, such a conference, maybe several years ago. It took time, I think, for the Palestinian community in Jerusalem to start talking itself about a distinguished political future for Jerusalem. Since the trauma of the death of Faisal Husseini, the closure of political leadership institution in East Jerusalem, the Second Intifada, etc. And this is our part of the changes that are happening in East Jerusalem. Now, as Abigail mentioned, I'm indeed a PhD student, part of my problems. And as a consequence, I'm an academic, but I will not talk about my research or in an academic approach. I was asked to talk more personally today, and I will try to do that. So, I was born in Jerusalem as was presented, and I was born in East Jerusalem. I was born in East Jerusalem in a Jewish neighborhood between two Palestinian villages, Tsur Baher and Jabal Mukabber. And every morning I heard the adhan, the call for prayer. I heard it 5 times a day, and it was the soundtrack of my childhood. I learned it by heart as a child. I used to play with Palestinian kids in the valleys and buy donkeys and pigeons from them. And then my parents would force me to bring it back to them, so they would profit twice. This kind of reality, we used to ride camels and spend a lot of time in the Arab sphere around my house. As a child, it was definitely part of my childhood environment. When I grew up a little bit, the first Intifada started, and the geography of fear that started to divide Jerusalem was just part of the childhood reality I experienced. And it's not a special story. It's a normal childhood of many Jerusalemite kids in both sides of Jerusalem. Something that is a bit more distinguished is that my father grew up in the shanty towns of Jerusalem, or mandatory Jerusalem, to a family of Kurdish immigrants and a merchant in the Machne Yehuda market. I grew up in the market, working in my father's stand, side by side with kids from Shuafat refugee camp. Yes, I was privileged. I was the son of the stand owner, yes, that maybe had his own issues as being deprivileged by the Zionist state. But in front of these children from Shuafat refugee camp, I was obviously privileged, but still most Jerusalemites around me, of course, never had the opportunity to work with Palestinian kids from the camps that don't go to school but go to work in the market. So I got to see other Jerusalem already as a kid, I think more than most people in West Jerusalem. But I father, and as life goes on, I grew up. It was quite standout, and I went to the army. In 1999, I went to the army and was exposed to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is also kind of a classical story of an Israeli Zionist child in West Jerusalem. אומרים, in Hebrew, ילד טוב ירושלים. Now, if I was ילד טוב, a good boy, but in Yerushalayim anyway. And there I started, at the one hand, to serve in the territories, in Lebanon, in Gaza, in the West Bank, as a combat soldier and a fighter and commander. But at the same time, to be exposed to a reality that was alien to me. When I was released in Operation Defensive Shield, I think it's called in English, in 2002, Chomat Magen, the kind of jobs that were available for me when Jerusalem was becoming the front of the home front, I was trained as a civilian security guard to detect suicide bombers in public transportation. Dressed in civilian clothes, trained to confront a suicide bomber. 30 of those exploded in Jerusalem, mainly in public transportation, during the time of my work. It was a very intense time. And I've explored about 5 years of being a security person, as a soldier or as a civilian, the other side of Jerusalem and the other side of the country. But it was clear to me that as someone carrying a gun, a uniform, or some kind of a consciousness that comes with it, and the way it looks to the outside is not going to allow me to see, to really understand the other that I kept seeing and that intrigued me. One more thing I understood was I need to learn the language I've heard my father speak, the language I heard the workers, the language I heard my neighbors. And I've started a journey, first of all, to take off the uniform and the earpiece and the gun and exchange them with a pen and just plain clothes and an ear to listen. And this journey continues. 2 years ago, I started a journey to learn the language I've heard my father speak, the language I heard my neighbors. And I've started a journey, first of all, to take off the uniform and the gun and exchange them with a pen and just plain clothes and an ear to listen. And this journey continues. 2 years part of it was to decide to, I didn't finish high school, but I've decided to go to university. And instead of going to, what I wanted to become a teacher for martial arts, but I went to university, I eventually ended up here. And I realized I need to study Arabic properly. But in order to study Arabic properly, I need to study Hebrew from the basics. In order to understand the Palestinians, I needed to learn something about Zionism and Judaism. I grew up in a secular family. And this process of wanting to understand the other, first of all, sent me to a long process of discovering myself, my roots. And ever since, and this is why in my PhD today, I want to do this comparative approach, because we're saying the Palestinian studies, Israel studies, I don't understand in the context of the conflict at least, how we can study only one side. Yes, it's so entangled, so, and I think Jerusalem is to a great extent a good example for this. And so when I wanted the normal work that doesn't include carrying weapons, I became a guide. And as part of my studies and my education, I became a guide specialized in Islamic Jerusalem, and then Palestinian Jerusalem, Arabic Jerusalem. And then, naturally, I became a geopolitical guide for East Jerusalem geopolitical issues. And later on, a geopolitical guide for the country as a whole, the West Bank to a great extent. I mainly work between Hebron to Ramallah and Jericho, a lot in Jerusalem, but also in Golan Heights and all over the country. And what I've done throughout these, more or less since 2005, was to take thousands of people, thousands of Israelis, to meet the other side, to meet the Palestinian side of Jerusalem. And what I've discovered, one of the understandings is that they have no idea. They come to Jerusalem, even the Jerusalemites, people who grew up all their life in Jerusalem, that have absolutely no idea what it means, East Jerusalem, what it means, the Jerusalem issue. Yeah? Now, why is that important, this gap? Maybe the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will last forever. Yeah, I don't know. But if it will ever be solved, it is, for me, 100% clear that a geopolitical compromise in Jerusalem will be part of this solution. There will be no other way around it. And two Israeli prime ministers out of four who ruled Israel in the 21st century offered a map of division to Jerusalem. Yes, it's not only my own ideas here. Yet the importance of the issue of Jerusalem to the future of our lives in the Holy Land stands in contradiction to this ignorance of what it even means. What is East Jerusalem? How it evolved? What? The Arabs don't have citizenships? These kind of questions. Now, Israelis, as you might have seen, like to argue, they have opinions, even on issues they don't really know about, and especially the conflict. But when I drive with them through the Arab parts of Jerusalem, now the Arab parts of Jerusalem are not like the Galilees, there are no signs in Hebrew, the graffitis are of Hamas or Fatah, and you see pictures of Palestinian leaders and shuhada on the walls. They feel threatened, they're quiet, they're inside themselves, they're afraid. They are out of their comfort zone. And there's a wide variety of responses I've encountered throughout the years, taking many different groups of Israelis. I took also diplomats and foreigners, etc., but mainly Israelis in East Jerusalem. At some point, when they feel a bit more at ease, there's a big lookout between Jabal Mukaber and the promenade. They break and they get angry. So what do you offer? Usually the Zionist leftists that are, the elderly Zionist leftists are the ones that get the most angry. and they find it the hardest to deal with the reality in East Jerusalem. I don't know why, but that's an understanding I've realized. It is indeed very hard to see the urban catastrophe Israel is responsible for after 50 years of control in Jerusalem, and the failure and the march of the folly of the Israeli policy in East Jerusalem. Yeah, so in the end of it, I understand this crisis they go through. I want to say that this gap is also intriguing on the background of the fact that the everlasting united capital of the Jewish people and the state of Israel, this slogan, is probably the most widespread, the most widely agreed political slogan in Israel, in Israeli politics today. And the more it is used by politicians and the more it is accepted and repeated, the more it is empty on the ground. And we have seen the failure of the Israeli policy in Jerusalem time and time again in the last years, just when we've celebrated 50 years in May 2017, yes, to the unification with all the fanfare and everything. 2 months later, Israel had to fall back from the metal detector farce, and we have seen that the strong and big state of Israel that controls the everlasting united capital cannot even put metal detectors around the holy site. The demographics that Israel set as a goal to maintain 75% in 67 has been changing ever since, and they're now standing on 40%. And I'm assuming that most of these details are known to you, and I can only tell you that the Judith Oppenheimer, the CEO of Iramim, an Israeli NGO, tells the story of Yair Lapid, the journalist, in a PhD class that he took with her. Asked her, what do you do? And she said, I'm the CEO of Iramim, and what is Iramim? And she told him, and he says, as far as I'm concerned, you can bring back West Jerusalem together with East Jerusalem. Yes, and that's a classical approach of many of the Israeli secular, I don't know if to say left or Israeli middle class. Yeah, the Israeli middle class. And the next day, after he became the representative of the Israeli secular middle class in the Knesset with 19 mandates, he said, Jerusalem is an idea, and an idea we do not divide. And this gap between the person and the politician, I think shows us how it is used in a cynical way, this slogan of the everlasting Jerusalem. I work with parliament members, with religious leaders, in the PA, also in the churches, with foreign diplomats about Jerusalem. So I see the approaches of legislators to Jerusalem, and it is sometimes surprising how shallow the knowledge is of people who should decide on the future of the city, and the failure is ongoing and clear. And the 2014, 2015, 2017, I think have proven this. In the last years, it's relatively quiet in the West Bank and in Israel, and Jerusalem is a source of instability, and not only produces violence but also exports violence in the Israeli-Palestinian context. So that's a little bit about the situation in Jerusalem. How much time do I have? 17. So I can expand a bit more about that. Okay, not expand. Okay. So okay, so there are sorry. So that is the situation. Now, to try and describe shortly the different trends that are occurring in Jerusalem in regard of the Israeli control. Of course, Israel tried to Israelize the Palestinian society in East Jerusalem. In '87, it was clear that it failed with the Intifada, that Palestinians in Israel didn't join the Intifada. The Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza, of course, were the Intifada, and Jerusalem was part of the West Bank. And the division that I remember as a kid was a proof to this, and some geographers called it a geography of fear. Yes, so many cities are, Belfast is a good example. There are many cities that are segregated in different ways. New York, on social, economic, on gender, on racial, ethnic, all big cities today have the different segregations. But some cities have this deeper sense of segregation, just like Belfast or Beirut of the Civil War or Berlin in the days of the wall, yet that are divided in a deep sense, that are divided politically, Nicosia if you want, yes, in the sense that the two communities or several communities sharing the city are deeply divided in their political identities in a way that you have to, that overcomes the other cleavages. That is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a deeply divided city. At the same time, you would see in Jerusalem, located in the heart of the West Bank, but in our consciousness or in our imagination, in a line between the mountain lane and Tel Aviv, as Israelis. Of course, in Palestinian eyes, it's between Ramallah and Bethlehem. That since the separation barrier was built, not between Jews and Arabs in Jerusalem, but between East Jerusalem and the West Bank, more and more Palestinians are seeking education, are consuming and buying in West Jerusalem. Obviously, even before that, many of them were employed in West Jerusalem. Most of them are employed in West Jerusalem. They are leaning on West Jerusalem on many things. Now, looking for example, the curriculum, the Bagrut, instead of the Tawjid, the Palestinian curriculum, has severe implications on their future political path, future professional, the professional future. Because if you go to Birzeit or El-Quds, it means that you might seek a job in the Arab world or in the Palestinian territories. But if you go to the Hebrew University, first of all, you have to go through a preparatory year. You learn some things about Israel. You learn Hebrew. And then it means you will work in Israel. And we see a very clear increase in this. And there are many other aspects, and there are surveys by the Washington Institute for Near Eastern Studies to show how much this means that they want to be Israelis. Yes? I have my own thoughts about this. Maybe in the question section I will have time to say what I think about the surveys. It's not good things. At the same time, it is very clear that there is more political violence by Palestinians in Jerusalem. Yes, there is a general sense of violence in the Israeli control over East Jerusalem, yes. I'm talking about the Palestinian political violence in Jerusalem. I'm talking about an increase in the Israelization. At the same time, you will see an increase in incidents of stone throwing, shooting, stabbing. Now, there's a reversed relation between violence of East Jerusalemites during the and the violence and the general level of violence. I'll explain. During the second Intifada, 5 years between 2000 and 2005, of course, the entire country was burning with violence. The West Bank and Israel, then Gaza. Jerusalem was the capital of this kind of violence, with 30 suicide attacks and dozens of other types of attacks. Yes, about 200 Israelis were killed, murdered in Jerusalem, including relatives and friends of mine. Yeah, today is the memorial day of one of them, and out of the 30 suicide bombing attacks, not even one was a Jerusalemite. When Israel Israeli authorities arrested more than 7,000 Palestinians during the Second Intifada in the West Bank. It arrested less than 200 Palestinians from East Jerusalem. They didn't take part as a generalization. Of course, they were these 200 that were collaborators, and there was one deadly squad, the Silwan squad, that was affiliated with Hamas, that bombed in the Hebrew University. But not even one was a Jerusalemite. Why there are articles, Hillel Cohen wrote an article trying to explain this, why they didn't participate, etc. After the Second Intifada ended and violence declined, after 1,500 and 3,500 Palestinians were killed in the Second Intifada, and violence started to decline for several reasons, they were quiet, more or less, in the entire country. 2006. In 2007, there is a gradual growth in a phenomena that starts in East Jerusalem and later will be called the lonely wolves, the individual attacks. It starts on the barrier in a neighborhood called Sheikh Said in Jabal Mukaber, which was separated together with several other neighborhoods that are in Jerusalem but outside the wall. Sheikh Said is not exactly in Jerusalem, but a barrier built inside the Palestinian neighborhood, and a shooting on the security personnel of the barrier was the first harbinger of this wave of Jerusalem terror. And as the entire country settles, in Jerusalem we see a different pattern of an individual kind of violence that is using guns when possible, like Allah Abu Dhaim shortly after will go to Merkaz Arav Yeshiva and murder 8 students, or a tractor, or a BMW, or a knife. And this didn't start out of the blue in 2014. It was a gradual growth since 2006, mainly for various reasons. I will just name them quickly and move on. First of all, the barrier that was built in 2002, 2003, 2004, between Jerusalem and the West Bank, that isolated Jerusalem, collapsed its economy. Imagine separating Tel Aviv from Gush Dan, with a wall, just to understand what it did. And another reason was, how much time? 5. So, another reason is the destruction of Palestinian leadership after the death of Faisal Husseini. And you can see that the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank has a moderating effect on political violence. The increase of settlement activity in Palestinian sphere. And last but not least, the increased activity of Jewish religious figures in the holy site, in Al-Aqsa, in the temple, on the Temple Mount. All these made special circumstances, but as some politicians used to say in the 90s, policy is what generates violence, right? And the Israeli policy toward this specific part of the country, East Jerusalem, is what generated a specific response in this area. Because when it was the most violent, they were the most quiet. So for some reason, those reasons are, I think, for those reasons I explained, when it was quiet in the rest of the country, they started to act violently. And we can still see it today. Anyway, this is more or less the reality today. At the same time, Palestinians want to study Bagrut and Hebrew and work in East Jerusalem, in West Jerusalem. By the way, West Jerusalem, if tomorrow you separate it with a wall, West Jerusalem will collapse. Hotels will not function. Restaurants will not function because they are completely dependent on Palestinian labor. Public transportation will not function. Some shopping malls in West Jerusalem, between 25 to 45% of shopping power is Palestinian. So West Jerusalem is dependent on East Jerusalem as well. And for these reasons, I think that in the lack of a political solution at the moment, there is some kind, there are many steps that can be taken to de-escalate situation in Jerusalem, but in the political context, we keep hearing about the division of Jerusalem. And I agree that Jerusalem needs to be divided in the sense of sovereignty, and that sovereignty on the Arab part of Jerusalem should be given to the Arab Palestinians to administer themselves, to run the city as they see fit, and to, of course, for it to be a part of the Palestinian state. At the same time, first of all, there is nothing we can do at the moment to promote it inside Jerusalem. And it makes sense to tackle the problems of Jerusalem and the discrimination and the gaps in the city, and to treat the city as a one whole. This corresponds to the Palestinian approach from the beginning of the peace process, even actually from the 80s, because the first one to bring up the issue of an open city was Faisal Husseini in just a short time before the Intifada, in a conference in West Jerusalem, the idea of an open city, two municipalities, under one umbrella municipality. Yes, this is the idea that Faisal Husseini brought. I don't know if it was his idea or somebody else, probably his. But ever since, it is the official Palestinian preferred position. Palestinians accept that West Jerusalem is Israel and East Jerusalem is Palestinian, despite the fact that you can see books that came out last year, الازدهار المعماري الفلسطيني بالغرب القدس المحتلة. يعني it's the Palestinian lists of the Palestinian homes that remained in the west side of the city. Of course, they have affiliation to it. Of course, Jews have had some neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, etc. But still, they will accept the dichotomy, but they want it to remain as an open city. While Israelis consistently opposed and demanded, and I've prepared a whole list of quotations and explanations, yes, against this idea, and demanded a solid border with checkpoints and barriers, because we need security, we need control. So the Israelis opposed the idea of an open city. But by the way, the Americans, from Nixon, from William Rogers in the late 60s, all the way to Clinton, despite the fact of accepting the division of Jerusalem, actually, and I also have here a list of quotations I won't read to you, accept and prefer the idea of a one open Jerusalem, yes, divided symbolically, politically, but administered as one open city. Now, this can correspond with the current reality today, and also be a preparation for a future political framework. At the same time, Jerusalem is not disconnected from the greater context of the Israeli-Palestinian process, agreement, reconciliation, peace, whatever you want to call it. And I believe that it can and should be a model for a political arrangement that is not based on separation. Because in Jerusalem, no matter how much we try to build a wall that we will unilaterally go back to and create a border, etc., in Jerusalem, we found ourselves, I'm saying it between quotation, stuck with hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. What kind of security is this? Now they're coming and stabbing us. I keep hearing this, right? So there is no wall high enough to create separation in Jerusalem. Around Al-Aqsa, you cannot separate Palestinians from Al-Aqsa. Not only the Jerusalemites. By the way, the qadiyya, the issue of Jerusalem, is not only a Jerusalemite issue. Some say it's all the Muslims, but it's definitely all the Palestinians, just like it's all the Israelis. What I want to say is that no matter how high we build the wall, in Jerusalem we will always meet. And it should be the model for a political reality in which we can both enjoy self-determination in some sort of a way, but not based on separation. I want to say that I, personally, today, find myself identifying the most with two states, one homeland idea of a confederative solution that will be presented here tomorrow. Thank you very much.